All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm Emma Wiles. I'm in IT, and today I'm going to be talking about my job market paper, which is on the informational role of the job resume and how that's impacted by AI. So writing is used in labor market matching on both sides of the market. For workers, they use their resumes to present information about themselves to employers. Employers use job posts to present information about jobs to workers in hopes that you can find sort of good matches using these tools. And writing a good resume incurs some cost to workers, and writing also has frictions. So the resume you write may not perfectly reflect either how good you are or what type of worker you are, your skills, that sort of thing. And so it's possible that this inefficiency could be solved by using AI to write resumes on your behalf. And sort of how that would then impact the matching that goes on between the workers and the employers is sort of a new and understudied problem. But anecdotally, people are doing it. Workers are using ChatGPT and other large language models to write resumes and cover letters. And so we want to investigate sort of what downstream implications this have for labor market matching. Okay, so to give sort of one example, let's say I want to hire an RA, and this is Jim, and Jim is a grad student who wants to apply to be my RA. Jim is going to go onto ChatGPT and try and get it to write a resume for him. So if you look at the resume that ChatGPT spits out, it is very sort of organized. It looks professional. It has this long list of skills that, if is correct, is very useful for the employer to know. But let's say that what Jim would otherwise have written is this sort of very short, brusque, this is an extreme example, but very short, brusque thing. He does not know how to spell bachelor's degree. And so maybe this sort of, it says he has attention to detail in this ChatGPT written resume. Maybe this is not true. And so it is ex ante not obvious whether the sort of not so great, really rough one that Jim writes himself is more or less informative to the employer who might hire him than the one that's written by the AI. And so the two questions I'm going to ask in this paper are, if you're Jim, which resume would you rather present to employers? And if you're me thinking about hiring Jim, which one would I rather get? And so slightly more formally, I want to investigate, can algorithmically enhanced writing improve hiring outcomes for job seekers? And if so, how useful is writing quality as a signal of worker ability? So to quickly preview the methodology, I'm going to first just document that a relationship exists between writing quality and hiring outcomes. That's not ex ante obvious. So I'll first just show that in observational data. And then I'm going to run an experiment, a field experiment in a real labor market, where I will randomly assign new workers to this market to receive access to a simple AI tool for improving their resume. So I ran this in 2021 before ChatGPT. So it's not ChatGPT. It is an AI tool that tweaks and improves your writing. You cannot prompt it. Nevertheless, it is a language model. So randomizations at the worker level, and then the sort of data sets that I'm going to use will include the text of the resume, every sort of application that the worker sends out, whether or not they're hired, and then downstream things like their star ratings at the end of the job, as well as the text of reviews they get from every job they work. So I'll do this very quickly, but I first use natural language processing to count that sort of errors in the writing on the resumes. And then here, just summed up, I'll show that there is a negative relationship between the sort of percentage of your resume that contains errors and the probability that you're hired in your first month on the platform. And so to think about why this might be happening, there's sort of a non-causal version of this story where employers don't genuinely care about the writing on your resumes, but we just see that better workers are hired because what better workers happen to be better writers. And so really we're just seeing, that employers would rather hire better workers as opposed to better writers. So that's possible. But it's also possible that this is a causal relationship and employers would prefer to hire workers with better writing. If so, sort of why would they care? So one story is what we'll call the signaling view, which is that writing ability signals diligence or attention to detail or something about workers' underlying type. And then sort of counter that with what I'll call the clarity view, which is that good writing with no change to the worker's underlying quality, simply helps employers to understand what it is the job seeker is proposing and allows them to be considered. So an extreme example of the clarity view in action would be, for example, if like a Nobel Prize winning economist wanted to apply to my RA job, but he wrote his resume in French and I couldn't read it, so I had no idea what his quality is. If you translate it to English, now all of a sudden I can consider him. So the setting for this experiment was a large online labor market. It looks something like labor markets offline. It begins when employers post a job, workers apply for these jobs with bids, employers pick ones to hire, and a contract is formed and all the work is done online. So the thing that's mainly distinct is you can think about this as something like Fiverr or freelancer.com, where all the work that is done, with a laptop and an internet connection. So there's no gardeners being hired here. And then at the end of every contract, both the employer and the worker are going to rate each other, both with, star ratings, and they're going to give text reviews. All right, so to test my hypotheses, so we've got, as I've described the experiment sort of briefly, we're randomizing writing quality. And what that means is that for new workers who are signing up to this market, at the profile creation sort of step, or the resume writing step, they're going to be randomized in a treatment or control group. In the treatment group, they're going to be given access to this tool in the text box. So once again, it's not writing the whole resume for them. It's just going to highlight errors and give suggestions for ways to improve the writing. But I do want to note, it's not just doing errors. It's also fixing things like the clarity of the text or how engaging it is, or fixing this, like the delivery is kind of weird, which is something that is especially useful for non-native English speakers on this sort of mostly English-speaking platform. All right, then we're going to find out, are treated job seekers more likely to be hired than the job seekers in the control group? And then in order to differentiate these two mechanisms, we're going to look downstream at the measures of employer satisfaction, proxied by things like hours worked, whether or not an employer rehires the workers, their star ratings, and the sentiment of reviews. So I'll do some sentiment analysis on the text of the reviews as well. And what we would sort of expect in a world where the signaling view is true is that the treatment is going to allow bad workers to sort of fake it and look like good workers. But if the clarity view is true, then the treatment is really just allowing good workers to show that they're good. And so very quickly, what we find is that treated workers are 8% more likely to be hired in the first month on the platform. There's also this composition effect where more productive workers are the ones that are hired. And so treated workers actually make 10% higher hourly wages, conditional on being hired. And then lastly, the treated workers' employers are no less satisfied with the work that the treated workers do, as proxied by all sorts of these things. And then the last point I want to make, because I think it's important, is that, this sort of the takeaways here are, if you are a worker, it's probably beneficial to use a tool like this, and you don't really need to worry about, tricking your employer into hiring someone who's not good. But if you're a platform thinking about rolling this out sort of platform wide, the one sort of thing I will say is that the results pretty much only hold for workers who are not in a lot of competition with other treated workers. So you can imagine that maybe there's a world where this treatment effect exists because it's actually like increasing labor demand. But it is also possible that this is just crowding out hires that were always going to go to someone. And so that maybe, if you're a platform, if you do this, maybe you shouldn't expect like 8% more jobs to happen on your platform, because it looks like it is sort of moving around who gets hired. And so just to close out, this is a very important thing right now, because large language models are sort of everywhere and being used on everything. And it's not totally obvious, in what cases that's good and in what cases it's harmful. And so at least in this setting, it seems like, with an AI tool that simply like tweaks what you've already written, that it has sort of good, outcomes for workers and employers, and at worst, sort of neutral ones for platforms. That's all. Thank you.